Good evening and welcome to another live stream. So I hope this finds you all well this Thursday evening. We're fairly getting through the week, and as I say, I hope you are all doing good. So we've got a really interesting guest coming on in a minute or two, but just ahead of that, there are certain things that we need to go through. So if you're watching this in Facebook, folks, share and like it. If you're watching it on YouTube, share, subscribe, hit the notifications bar. Those things are really important. If you do those, please, I'd appreciate that. All my social media links are down below in the description box, so you can find me on Parler, Gab, and so many different places anyway, but it's all down below. If you like what we're going to be talking about, give us the thumbs up. That helps the algorithms understand that this is an interesting channel. So thumbs up if you like it. If you don't like it, you're best not saying it. And then finally, not last but not least, if you want to see more of this kind of stuff and keep free speech alive, do go to altnewsmedia.net/donate and hit the donate now button. Give £1, whatever you can afford, doesn't matter. But if you can do that, that would be fine. And then the other thing to say, on this here, we are running on YouTube a little poll, which you can also participate in, just to find out the sort of stuff that you folks would like to hear more often. I've put up a couple of ideas, and you can give me all your ideas. So that's on a little poll, which you can also take part in as well. And finally, and last but not least, super chats are enabled here on the stream. So if you want to get your comment read out and discussed, then that's what you need to hit. Okay, so I think that's everything. All the matters sorted out before we proceed. So again, thanks for your focus, and a warm welcome, by the way, to those folks who I can see already on the stream. Thanks for being here with us. Okay, without further ado, let me bring on my special guest tonight. I'm really pleased to have him with us. So please bring our guest on now. And here he is, Chris Daniel, who is my special guest for this evening. Chris, a warm welcome to you.
Yeah, thank you, David.
I think actually, Chris, my stream is freezing a little bit here, so I might have to do something. So I'll tell you what, once I sort this out, perhaps you'd like to give a little bit of background on yourself, and let's get the conversation underway.
Okay, sure, David. Yeah. So the last 10 years or so, I've been a landlord, and I've worked for a landlord association, advising landlords and then training landlords. And then, a few years ago, set up independently. So I'm running my own private sector housing consultancy now called PossessionFriend.uk. So I've been in housing law for the last 10 years, I've noticed a lot wrong with it, and a lot wrong with it that people aren't saying, and I thought, well, I know who would be interested, and so here I am with you, David.
Yeah, well, I'm very pleased to have you here on the stream. Can I just check, by the way, everybody? Can everyone hear me? Okay, because I do have a few technical problems at this end, but as long as you can hear me, just let me know. Thumbs up. Can you hear me okay, Chris? Yeah, you can. All right. Yeah, and look, this is the heart of it, folks. So, I mean, I should have really said this. The thing is that we all live. Everyone watching this tonight, you've got a roof over your head, I assume. Unless you've got outdoor Wi-Fi, and we housing and having a home. It's such a fundamental thing, Chris, for everybody in this country. But where I was really interested in what you had sort of said to me was this whole issue of housing in the United Kingdom. And the way things have been changing and the problems that are associated with it. And what we've seen the emergence of the amateur landlord, and then we've seen the demonization of the amateur landlord. We've seen successive governments, right wing, left wing, make all kinds of promises, Chris, about they're going to fix the housing crisis. without ever really explaining it. So what I thought would be really good for everybody is if you can try and put things into context for us. So where exactly are we in the UK when it comes to the issue of housing?
Well, we've slowly been getting worse over the last couple of decades, and you're right, David, that everything that either of the political parties have talked about or implemented have just tinkered around the edges and have actually just made the situation just gradually slightly worse, and then slightly worse and slightly worse, and it's not getting better. It's only getting worse. I'll come on to some of the reasons behind that, later.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing, because it's like there's these statistics, and I know you've got lots of stats to share with us, Chris. But one of the things that strikes me is, and I think from your accent, a bit like myself, I don't think you were originally born in England somehow, but could be. I detect the Welsh. Yeah, and
South Wales.
South Wales, and I think South Wales and maybe Northern Ireland and even parts of Scotland, they're not heavily populated areas as much as parts of England are particularly heavy populated areas. So we've seen the UK population as a whole grow massively, Chris, massive growth in the UK population. But England seems to be the main vector where the population growth is, and that's got to be an impact. I mean, there has to be consequences, which we don't really talk about. No one talks about this. Just, population can go up by X million and it's all fine. But is it?
Yeah. Well, it's not, is it? And we just squeeze people in and squeeze more people in, and and then with the shortages, price goes up, and as you say, it's not getting better. You talked about demonizing landlords, and that's a big part I want to spend a few minutes on.
Yeah.
Who is a landlord exactly? And we've got a huge mismatch about what is a landlord, because if you look at some descriptions of landlords from government or from some pro-tenant groups, by the way of which I'll come on to later, but they only represent a very small number of tenants, but more on that later. But a landlord is described as some lord of the manor, driving a Rolls Royce. I mean, you drive a Rolls Royce, David. What do you think of when you see somebody driving a Rolls Royce past you? What do you think of?
Well, yeah, but I guess you think this is someone with huge financial resources behind them, don't you?
Yeah, well, to me, okay, there's two choices to me. You could think a number of things, I guess, but you could think, well, wow, what's he done? What effort and what work and what skill has he got to develop, finances such that he or she has managed to acquire that much wealth? Unfortunately, because some people in society who see a nice car driving past them, and their reaction is bastard, and that's what they think. And it's not. But what it is, they don't decry the Rolls Royce or the Bentley. They want it. They just don't want to do the work that a person who's driving it has done to get it.
Yeah,
that's really a lot of what's wrong with society.
Oh, it's very true, actually, Chris. I remember going back in time about 35 years ago. I can remember he was quite an elderly gentleman, and he'd worked all his life really hard, and he bought himself a Rolls Royce. And after a very short period of time, he had to get rid of it because just people thought, oh, you're this, that. They called him very, very unfortunate names, and it's kind of sad because he was a hardworking guy. He wasn't landed gentry. He'd worked his way up, he worked his way up from the ground floor to a position where he could actually afford it. And good on him, I thought, even then, But as you said,
a reason why I picked a car, David, is it's kind of a good analogy for where I'm going with this. Who are landlords? Because so you ask somebody, well, what cars are on the road? Well, if you ask the people who've got this biased view of landlords, they'll say, what cars are on the road are Range Rovers, Bentleys, and Rolls Royces. Well,
Hmm.
we all know that there's a whole variety of cars on the road, from minis to it's not, and that's what housing is. It's not one size fits all. Yeah, there's landlords out there with 20, 30 properties and 100 properties. But 50% of landlords, David, 50%, half of the landlords, there's 2.5 million of them. Half of them own only one property. And
Hmm.
the way they've come by that property is not deliberate. You could call them accidental landlords if you like. But what
Yeah.
happened, when I was a kid, I'm going back a few years, but 40, 50 years ago, your parents, would have a
Mm.
huge mortgage. One of them would work, and the mortgage was a huge debt around their neck. And then Aunt Maud would pass away or whatever, and would leave the house, it would get sold, and the proceeds divvied up to 2 or 3 siblings, and you would pay off probably either all or a large chunk of your mortgage. And then the family then, who only had one working, used to think that their lifestyle had gone up about 10 notches, and,
Yeah.
and so that's what used to happen. But today, that doesn't happen. What happens today, primarily because of the pension situation and the finances and so forth, people are saying, well, I need to protect myself for the future, and I don't want to sell Aunt Maud's house. I need to keep it as a nest egg, because in 30 years' time, perhaps my pension is worth nothing or something. Well, at least I've got that. And meanwhile, I'll rent it out and I'll rely on a modest income from one property, just to sort of enhance my own lifestyle. Perhaps I can change, perhaps our family can change maybe our lifestyle and
Yeah.
work part-time instead of full-time. And that's how, and these people who are inherited Aunt Maud's house, for example, if people who are working on the checkouts in supermarkets or collecting your rubbish bins, they're not driving Rolls Royces. So
Well,
that's half your landlords for you, David.
well, Chris, would it be fair to say that an awful lot of other landlords have also been people who, at certain points in the last 25 years, let's call it, they've been encouraged to, if they, to get to in some ways to go into this area and
Yeah,
maybe to become, as you say, like a one property landlord. And
yeah,
I can remember, I've got my friend Chris Davis on the stream here, who's a big fan of Dublin. I prior to COVID times, used to have a lot of business interest down in Dublin, and actually you'd speak to like taxi drivers, and they would have a property or two maybe, and
yeah.
that was leading up to the big crash in 2008 2009, mind you. But they were ordinary people. I think your point, Chris. These landlords, the vast majority, they're just ordinary working class people who just see having a property as a potential, as you say, a potential pension. Because let's face it, they're not going to get very much else from any
No,
government.
no, but that's right. And you mentioned COVID very aptly. I was going to use that analogy actually to show what actually happens
Mm-hmm.
when you got a shortage of something, like we've got a shortage of housing. We haven't been building. I mean, this is not news to anybody, but even the government admit it, and that's something. But we haven't been building the houses that the country needs for 20 years or more. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
since, since
Yeah.
since Maggie started selling the council houses off, we haven't been building what we need, and so we've been getting shorter and shorter. And there's been more and more people, and demand has been going up. A number of houses have been going down for 20 years or more. And what happens when demand goes up? Well, you mentioned COVID. What happened with toilet rolls? You couldn't get any. That's how scarce they went. You had
Yeah.
to pay more for them, and that's what happens with anything when there's a shortage. It's availability, obviously, because of the shortage contracts. Naturally, the price of it will go up. That's not necessarily people profiting. That's just economics 101. That's just fact of life.
Yes.
You've got to look at why is there the shortage.
Well. Okay. Let's focus on that then. Why? So that's the question. Why does England, but the UK in general, have such a problem in this unmatched supply and demand? Why is there a shortage, Chris?
That's such a basic question, David. You'd think that that would be the most question that would be asked, and you'd think that would be the question that government would be addressing. But no, they don't. The government never address the problem. They just tinker around the edges. Let me give you two other problems. Okay, we're short of hospital spaces. We're short of hospital beds. That's for decades has been getting worse and worse. And the government will say, "Oh, we put an extra 10 million in this year," and they have, but it's not touching the sides. Look at motorways. Look at the traffic on the roads. The government is saying, "Well, you need to adopt greener travel. There's too many people on the roads. So you need to take the train and things like that." I know, and the shortage of hospital beds. Well, we are paying extra money. So but the extra that they're putting in is just way short of demand, and that goes for housing, goes for hospitals, it goes for roads. I mean, on the road situation, we've got a coroner recommending that the CPS consider the Highways Agency for corporate manslaughter for deaths on these smart motorways. And that's because they're trying to answer the demand problem with tinkering around the edges using technology to save on hard shoulders, because they're using hard shoulders for traffic. But it's all coming down to the question you asked: why is there the demand? And the big reason why there's a demand is it's the big question. That's the elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is the big I. Okay, it stands with an I. Now, here's a question for all the viewers. What is the elephant in the room? What is the big I demand in housing and motorways? And what is it? Who's putting the answer down? I can't see anybody answering it.
All right. So okay. You've all been challenged by Chris here. So let's think about what might be the one thing that we mustn't speak about that's causing this massive disconnect between supply of housing in the UK and the demand for it. We've got Luke's come up with Indians. Don't think so, Luke. Don't think so. But you got
kind of on the right lines, but it wasn't the I word I was thinking of.
Come on, you're a well-educated bunch, and watch me. You know exactly what this one is. So what's driven the explosion in the British population in the last 20 years, let's call it? I guess since certainly from the turn of the millennium. What is it? What has it been?
Begins with I. We give him a clue, but
immigration. Well done, Jed, for getting there. Yeah, and of course we all know this, and actually, like, this is a serious point. We've approached it like lightly, but and this is your point, and this is what I think you need to expand on now, Chris. What has the impact been of immigration, both legal and illegal to a degree, on property and housing stock in the UK?
Okay, well, look, just some figures. Last year, we had 712 people enter the country. We had 712,000 and 402,000 leave. So that leaves 313,000. So you're nearly 250,000 people there. That's the known figure. Okay. Now we built 170,000 properties. So we're only building half the amount of properties, and that's not taking into account all the shortages we've built up over the last 20 years. And so, this has happened. This has been happening for 20 years. It hasn't only been last year we've been short of housing. It's been happening for 20 years. And so, gradually there's more and more people coming in. It's not more and more families already living in the UK suddenly having 6 children instead of 2 children. That's not it. So it's the immigration that has put a lot of extra demand on the existing stock that we've got, and we're trying to build extra stock, but we're not catching up with it. And so serious is this issue, and we were kidding about it, David, about the elephant in the room and things, and but it is so serious that we've got instances like grooming gangs operating in some northern
Oh
towns.
yeah. Yeah.
And you've got you've got a detective who worked on the case,
Maggie.
Maggie Oliver.
Yeah.
And she went to the chief constable because the force shelved the investigation into thousands of girls who were being groomed and raped by gangs of a certain group of people. And so she went to the chief constable, she went to the Home Office, she went to the CPS, and basically she had to resign for whistleblowing. So
Yeah.
that's how serious the issue is. And so, government won't talk about it. What government will do is stick in plasters around the edge, but they won't look at actually what is the cause of the shortage of housing. They'll do lots of things that tinker around, kick the can down the road, but won't look at actually the cause. Now, New Zealand actually is one of the few countries who, amongst the least populated, have actually now started to halve their immigration numbers.
Because
So,
like the thing that's one of the things that amazes me when it comes to property and housing and all of that, Chris, is if you take like London and parts of London, like thinking of Tower Hamlets, for example, being one area. If you
sure,
look at the massive inpouring of immigration into areas like that
yeah.
versus the available housing stock in areas like that, it
Mm.
seems to me completely I can't even understand how it can possibly work. How many? I mean, how could the housing stock possibly keep up with the demand in a place like, say, London?
Well, it can't. That's a simple reason, and you see people sleeping on benches in doorways, and sofa surfing and all the rest of it because of that. Some of it you don't see visibly, and you have 10, 20, 30 people. You ask any letting agents who might be watching, you ask them how many genuine inquiries they get per property. There's 10, 20, in some areas, 30 people trying to rent one house. Well, the numbers don't divide, David. So what the government do, they say, well, we're trying to get 3 gallons of tenants into a 2-gallon bucket here.
Yeah,
And all
yeah,
these extra tenants are flooding out all over the floor and making what a mess. And so the government's response to that has been, well, this 2-gallon bucket must need an electrical installation certificate because it's not fit for quality. It's not fit for
yeah,
purpose. So
yeah,
these private, and only the private rented bucket, mind, or private rented houses, as we're talking about here, they
yeah.
must have an electrical insurance certificate. I'll give other examples, but you're just picking on one thing now. But strangely enough, council housing or social housing, no, they don't have to have an electrical safety certificate. The government must think that these social houses and council houses must get their electricity off a different grid that doesn't cause a danger, or they must think that social tenants must have been vaccinated against electrocution. I mean, well, why is electricity dangerous in private rented houses and it's not in a council house? You
Although,
know,
mind you, Chris makes the point here. You can see it. Chris Davis makes the point, Chris, that he says there's plenty of office space available in London now for new flats, but they'll be too expensive. I would imagine so, Chris, when it comes to,
well,
you know,
yeah, one of the government's answers, okay, is build to rent. So they got these large corporate companies coming in, some allegedly, Tory party donors, but they got these large companies coming in and building huge flats and with complexes with gymnasiums and things, and what have you. But that's not the type of property we're short of. We're short of social housing.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
all the people on the bottom rungs of the housing ladder. We've talked about the perception of landlords driving Rolls Royces or having dozens of properties, and when the reality is actually different for half of them. But
yeah.
it's just not what's needed. These your people on housing benefit are not going to be able to afford a flat with a gymnasium. If they could, they wouldn't be looking for a house.
Well, you're right. I mean, and this is the point to Chris Davis. I agree with you, Chris, because I would imagine those kind of luxury apartments or whatever are going to be way at the top end of the market. They're not going to be for the average sort of Joe wanting to even perhaps get onto the property market for the first time. But the thing is, like, you know, well, what about land, Chris? What about the price of land? Because surely that's also a factor. Because as this demand rises exponentially, and you know, and supply is sort of restricted, then clearly the price of land is going to be a major factor as well in all of this, isn't it?
Yeah, but well, you've got to control demand, David. You know, because like I said, it's just it's just if you don't control demand, well, then things are going to become more scarce. What happens when things become scarce is, the price of it goes up and so forth. What I don't understand a lot the government do, but back in, especially with all the single rooms, the single accommodation is needed, because the properties that we do have very few of that are, in existence are generally, people build houses. They generally build a 2-bed house or a 3-bed house. Yeah, there's some 4-bed houses built, and there
Mhm.
are some 1-bed flats and 1-bed studios. But the bulk of the actual demand for accommodation is for 1 bedroom. And you've got like shared houses, that have been operated as houses in multiple occupation, as they're called. And so
Yeah, yeah.
the government decided, with all this, shortage of housing, and the predicament that we've been in for a decade or more, and how it's getting worse, not better, the government decided in 2018 that it was a good idea to have minimum size standards for bedrooms. Now, I'm not knocking that. And
Mhm.
so if they decided in 2018, look, we're not going to allow any more properties to be built, any more housing to be built that hasn't got a bedroom of at least 6.51 square meters. Fair enough. Okay. Now, of course, you've got to pay for a bedroom that's 6.51 square meters, but fair enough, you can make that decision. But what the government did in 2008, well, they did it in 2016, but they gave a 2-year lead time. They
Mhm.
said by October 2018, a landlord can't rent out a bedroom that's less than 6.51 square meters. So these shared houses, house of multiple occupation, where there were 4 people sharing a house, they have a bathroom and a kitchen and a living room to share, and they just go into the bedroom to sleep. A lot of them were youngsters working in the city and
Yeah.
things, and they only used to spend 6 hours a day in bed, and that was fast asleep, crashed out after visiting the pub kind of thing. But the government took 200,000 bedrooms out of circulation by doing that at a time when the country can least afford it.
So let's just think about that for a second, because I hadn't heard that statistic before. So by that change in the sizing, the minimum size of a bedroom,
Yeah,
Chris, 200,000, almost well, all getting on for 250,000.
yeah, yeah,
We're taking right.
yeah.
Right. So. I mean, that's a remarkable statistic. So demand has never been greater, but by its actions, government has actually de facto restricted supply even more.
Of course they have.
That's
Of course they have.
right.
They're already in the shtuck. They've already got 10, 20, 30 people looking for every property, and then they take 250,000 out.
Right. So okay. So let's talk about so what's happened from 2018 on then. So the last 2-3 years. So well, what is the consequence of that been then?
Well, it just caused prices to increase because there's a shortage in the demand.
Mm.
You got you got 700,000 people sofa surfing. So I think the figure is 1 in 30 homes has got somebody sleeping on their settee. A friend, or people who haven't got accommodation, and they're not registered as homeless because they've got a settee to sleep on. They're on a waiting list and things like this, but they haven't got a home. They're borrowing the favour of a friend on a settee of a friend.
And and I think in certain areas the number the settees, the sofas would need to be quite big, because I think it may be even more than one. But
it's funny you should say that, Dave, because the figures are that it's actually about 500,000, not 700,000. Okay, but the reality is that half that 500 are only half that 500 are single households. So the other half, so the other 250 are more than one household. So therefore, that's where you get your over your 700,000 sofa surface from, because half of the 500,000 are people that's got a child or or a partner.
It's a remarkable statistic, Chris. I'm just gonna pause for a moment, and then what we're going to do is we're going to drill down into this a little bit more. So, yeah. Just moving, I've seen a chap called Luke has brought up what I think is a really good and valid point, which is that government doesn't build houses, builders build houses, and builders are commercial people, right? And that's absolutely as it should be. And they will build where it suits them, and it has to be profitable. I mean, there's no arguing with that point, is there, Chris?
No, and the thing is, it's got to such an extent that the 170,000 properties that were built, only 17,000 of those were built by councils. Now, why is that?
Yep.
Because councils are desperate. Okay, they're desperate looking for properties. You probably see in the news that they're stacking people in porta cabins as temporary accommodation, accommodating them in B&Bs and in Premier Inns or travel lodges, and the uproar that the council get for that, and that has been going through the roof. So the council situation of accommodating people short term, that has gone through the roof. And that's not ideal. And so people are supposed to be only in there for 8 weeks, because that's what the emergency accommodation time scale is. But people are in there for 4 and 5 and 6 months because there isn't the provision. So, we're not building enough, only 170,000.
Yeah.
Councils are only building 17,000. Why are councils only building 17,000? Because it's just not economical. It's not economical to provide a rental property, because if you look at what the amount of money somebody who's on benefit is going to get from the government, that just doesn't pay for a property. It's certainly not paying for one to be built in 2020's prices. So what are you going to get from the government in housing benefit? It's just not going to cover it. So they don't build them.
Well, is this the whole thing? That's one of the things that I find really strange, Chris, is when people talk about affordable housing, you've got to have affordable. I mean, I've always thought that's an oxymoron. I mean, either you can afford it or you can't. I don't get this. I think affordable housing is a euphemism for prices that are subsidized down. And I don't even understand, how does that work? To go back to Luke's point, builders talk about they've built 100 houses and 20 of them are affordable. But what does that actually mean?
Well, I was coming to that actually. Affordable houses, David, simply put, is another con. Okay, it's another government con on figures. To put it simply, what affordable housing is and why it came about is because the government realised this situation, that social housing, housing associations, councils weren't building properties because they just wasn't economical. Now, private builders will build them because they would build them and charge above the housing benefit rate, because that's what market rent is, because that's what it costs to build a house today. Not because they want to up from a Range Rover to a Bentley or something like some people would have it told. That's what it costs to build a property today, and so they will charge more for it. So tenants are not in a good position. nobody's in a good position here. Tenants now have got to use their housing benefit and dig into some of the other money they get from benefit to top up that to afford what is market rent today. So what happened, to answer your question about affordable rents, was the government realized this way back, 2010, I think. The government realized this, and they had a committee, and they met, and they were consulted by the wise and the good, a lot of people from housing associations and things, and they realized that this was a situation that they weren't building because it wasn't paying. So what the government did was they implemented affordable rent. So what that means, okay, affordable rent, and I've got an example for you here from, and these figures have been taken by a housing consultant, a housing association consultant called Joe Halewood. Goes on the internet by Joe Spey, very knowledgeable guy. Speaking to him recently. So what he found was in Croydon, he found that in 2018, a 3-bed house in Croydon, okay, the LHA rate was £316. If that 3-bed house was fully occupied, those tenants would have, could be fully occupied, by a tenant, would have £316. That's the maximum. The social housing rent for these properties by housing associations, and I guess what the council would charge as well, was 167. Okay, so everybody wants to move to social housing, but of course it's not paying, is it? And housing associations can't afford to increase their stock. When they're charging £167 a week, when the housing benefit is actually twice that, is 316. Okay, but 316 doesn't cover it either. 316 isn't nowhere near enough. So what the government did to encourage housing associations and councils to build more property, they realised that it was going to cost them more than £316 a week, basically, to build more property. So what they said in this Croydon example, in this 3-bed Croydon example I'm giving you, okay, varies according to different bedrooms in different parts of the country, but just to give you this one example, they allowed social housing or councils, not private landlords, okay, they allowed social housing and councils to be able to charge what they now called affordable rent. The affordable rent for that property is £427. So basically, what they've allowed housing associations and landlords are going to be absolutely amazed and livid at this. What they allowed housing associations and councils to do is to charge, or in other words, receive housing benefit at a higher rate for a council house or a local authority property than they would if. So you have two 3-bed semis in Croydon, okay? So before 2018, these are the figure prices. Before 2018, in one of the 3-bed semis, it was privately owned by a private landlord and a tenant. The tenant would be paying, or would be having, housing benefit of £316 a month. Might be paying £340 a week. A week it is. In rent, but would have to make that up. So in the one semi, the private tenant, on housing benefit will be having £316, and he'd have to give that to the private landlord with whatever small top up, if appropriate. But the house next door that was owned by either the council or the housing association, they would be able to, not to a current tenant that was on a social rent. Okay, they couldn't change the status of a current tenant on social rent, which was an incentive for them to evict that tenant, which is missed on a lot of tenant support groups. Okay, but more on that later. So it's actually an incentive now, because if this tenant on social rent at £100 and something a week goes, then the following Monday they can issue an affordable rent tenancy and get housing benefit or universal credit of £427. So in other words, the taxpayer is paying more for housing benefit to
Yeah.
house somebody in social housing or council housing than they are to house somebody in a private landlord's property.
So when it comes to the private landlord, then what does this all mean? Then,
Well, the private landlord is getting squeezed out, yeah, because the cost of property, is increasing for everybody. It's no cheaper for social housing or council housing to build
yeah,
a new 2-bed, 3-bed property than it is for a private landlord. It's the cost of the land and the bricks and mortar.
yeah,
But the private landlord's only being able to receive, or the private tenant is only able to receive £316 a week. But a tenant next door in social housing or a council house can have 427. Now, this rate around the country, okay. In fact, a tenant support group, Shelter, they
yeah.
did a study around the country, and they looked at what was the market rate, what was the market rent, okay, and they found that 97% of the country, that housing benefit didn't come up to the market rent. Now, there's no surprise when you think that for 4 years, the government froze local housing allowance. They froze it. So as naturally all other prices were increasing, and also during this time, 2016, 2015, for 4 years, we had this housing benefit freeze. What happened around that time for 6 years also was austerity. You remember austerity, David? It was
Yeah.
when everybody's pay was frozen apart from MPs, if you remember that, right? So that's, we had that austerity. So everybody was financially affected, but of course didn't stop prices going up.
No,
Nothing stops prices going up. You can have austerity, you can choose whatever housing benefit rate, but the cost of bread and fuel and building properties, you can't legislate against that.
no. I mean, it's something, Chris. A long time ago, when I was at university and I was an economist, I did economics. That was my chosen sphere. But the most basic rule in economics, it is the iron law of supply and demand. You can't get around it. Socialists might like to. It's impossible. And as you say, regardless of everything else that you tinker with and mess about with, that iron law always continues. What is the supply?
Yeah.
What is the demand? Simple as that, isn't it?
Yeah, private renting has been, all renting's been increasing because, austerity, people can't afford to buy their own homes. The latest government con is help to buy. Okay, well, is it a con? Well, look, any help to somebody to get on the housing ladder is obviously got to be welcome. But, we're talking about a cupful. We're trying to fit these 3 gallons into a 2-gallon bucket, and the government say, "I got a cup full here." Well, it's just not gonna cut it, David.
No.
You got basically private landlords, 2.5 million of them. You got 4.5 million or 4.7 million private tenants. You've got about, I think, is it 4 million social tenants? There's slightly more private rented tenants than there are social tenants. Okay.
Yeah.
But social landlords, now private landlords getting all the stick for being nasty and evicting tenants who can't pay and things like that. Heaven forbid, you should be able to have something without paying. But they get all this flack for evicting people. But actually, social landlords evict 4 times as many tenants as private landlords do, and there's less social tenants.
Yeah, but I mean, the one thing, Chris, that for the last, I'd say at least the last 10 years, the successive governments have absolutely demonized private landlords. They paint them as vultures, ripping off people, charging extortionate amounts of money, putting people in substandard accommodation. I mean, honestly, private landlords have had worse press than COVID in many regards. And I find this really strange because the same people provide a very important service to, as you say, millions of tenants.
Well, 84% of tenants are satisfied with private renting. Now, you can't say 84% of the public are satisfied with MPs. You'd be hard pushed to find 16 MPs you'd be satisfied with, let alone 84% of them.
I can't find
No,
any. So, yeah.
you know, so you've got a very high level of satisfaction. Especially given the climate, a very high level of satisfaction, a very low eviction rate, and yet all the focus, by tenant support groups is on the 2% of tenants that landlords have to evict. It's not on the 4 times that many that social landlords are evicting. It's not on the higher rent that social landlords are charging. We're not really charging the tenants because they're getting it paid in housing benefit. The taxpayer is losing. Tenants are losing. There's hundreds of millions of pounds of housing benefit paid direct to tenants but don't get passed on to landlords. And the government and the Department of Work and Pensions through Universal Credit, they're not interested in it at all. Now they should be interested. The government should be interested in paying money for one reason and it not ending up, because sooner or later what happens, David, is that the private landlord has to evict that tenant because they're not passing the rent on. Naturally, they have to evict that tenant, and then they go through all the costs and the expense of that and what have you. So
Yeah.
that person then goes to the local authority and has to take up 6 months of a travel lodge hotel or a porter cabin, and prey on their emergency accommodation and burden the local authority. Now, they don't have a duty to provide accommodation where the person has been evicted for not paying rent. But
Yeah.
the problem is if that family has been evicted, has got a child, then they have to by default, because they can say to the parents, well, we're not going to provide accommodation for you, but they'd have to accommodate the child. And the thing is, it would cost 3 times as much to pay for accommodation and care for the child, aside from the obviously it not being in the best interest of the child and not being a child's fault that the parents hadn't paid the rent.
Yeah.
But economically, it's not viable for the local authority to use that while you've made yourself intentionally homeless, because they're going to have to pick up the cost. And I say it's taxpayer. So anybody watching this who's not a landlord needs to be really concerned about all this, because it's their taxes that are paying for this. It's their taxes that are paying more in rent for social housing and housing associations. It's their taxes that are paying for people to receive housing benefit and just, and buy something else out of it and not pass it on to the landlord and then get burdened on the local authority and cost the local authority, in other words, more taxpayers' money to have to, go through the washing cycle again.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds an absolute mess. So, okay, Chris, we've identified all that's wrong with it, right? We're clear that there's a lot of things wrong. What do we need to do to make things right?
Well, look, we could have a couple of hour sessions on that, David. But what I'm saying, okay, my point is this: is that the whole reason for it is demand. This is a 2-sentence summary of what I'm saying this evening. The whole point of it is demand, and for starters, nobody's acknowledging that. So if the government are not acknowledging it because they're afraid to acknowledge it, because it involves immigration, which involves race, which is totally taboo. First person to mention a word gets a card to go to the races, or is it a race card? I get mixed up. I'm not really interested, but first person. So it's a taboo subject, even to the extent, like I said, of that. If we've got thousands of kids, thousands of girls being raped in one town, and across the country, that equates to hundreds of thousands of teenage girls being raped, and the government won't do anything about that and will shelve that and will bury that. Are they going to do anything about housing? But there's a professor of demography in Oxford, and he reckons that by 2040 we're going to be up at 80 million population in this country. We're 67 now.
Yep.
By 2060, he says, now make of this what you will, but by 2060, immigration will have got to the extent that white Europeans will be in the minority in this country. Now, think what you like about that, okay? Be totally happy with it or otherwise. But in relation to housing, the point I'm making in relation to housing is that, we can't cope now. We couldn't cope 10 years ago. We've just been bumbling around. People are being losing accommodations, sofa surfing, and all the rest of it, because we've got more people coming in than we can house. We can't house 313,000 people a year when we are only providing a fraction of that in accommodation, and when it costs that much to provide it.
And Mr. Joe Cool here says demographics are your destiny, and you're right, Joe, about that. And like that 80 million figure that you mentioned there, Chris, as a putative UK population in about what 30, 40 years or whatever.
No, less than 20 years, 2040.
20 years, yeah. So who knows? I might even still be around by that point.
But it's going to come a lot sooner, you see, David, because that's just taking known immigration figures, and that's just running the numbers. Well, we know that we know we've got unknown figures. We know that if they can count 313,000, we know that there's more. There's at least that. So we know there's more than it. Look, I'll give you an example of that. They reckon that there was 4,000 rough sleepers. Okay, only 4,000 rough sleepers. Okay, I think there's that many in London, but that was the number of rough sleepers that the government quoted for the whole country. Now, when COVID came, we had the all-in. So we had all the rough sleepers, accommodated, in March and things like that in travel lodges and B&Bs. How many people did they end up accommodating? 29,000. What's the saying? Lies, damn lies, and government figures, isn't it, or something like that?
So that's a good statistic. So 4,000 approximate figure, reality 29,000. That's out by a scale of around about
7 1. So when we talk about 2040, it ain't going to be 2040. It's going to be more like 2030, 2035 at the latest. And so we got to look at demand, and it's the same with motorways, the same with hospitals and everything else. And if we're just ignoring that, and we're just afraid to mention the word, and we can't even have an honest conversation about it, well, what chance have we got? All we're doing is, we're saying, this private rented bucket, it needs an electrical certificate. Or, this bucket is overflowing in some areas because of demand. The housing situation in some areas is overflowing in terms of demand. So what we'll do is we'll make all the properties in that area have a license. And so we'll make the landlords pay £1,000 every 5 years for a license. Well, the way business works, David, basically, 101, business gets a cost. Well, guess what happens to that cost? And then the government wonder why rents are going up. And then at the same time they wonder why rents are going up, okay, they'll also bring in affordable rents to allow social housing and councils to have more rent than they're allowing the market.
It's madness, isn't it? This is madness. And the thing is, it's not going to end well, is it? Because this is going to build up, and it must already be building up in certain areas, huge frustrations.
You got landlords exiting the market. Now there'll always be more landlords coming into the market, but net figures, it is slowly contracting. Okay, slower than what was thought, but it's slowly contracting. You're always going to get new landlords coming in because your mods are always going to die. You're always going to have this 50%. People who are 15 now, in 30 years' time, when a relative dies, they're going to inherit the house. So you're always going to have new landlords, and you're always going to have about 50%. You're always going to have these people being landlords. The government don't like that. They see them as accidental, as single entities. Well, perhaps they are, but the government aren't helping in the amount of regulation and red tape that they're creating. And to some extent, if I'm honest, landlords need to also, the single landlords need to put a bit more upskilling into their game in terms of regulation. But it is just the figures are just going downhill fast, David.
Well, actually, I'll just put this comment up because it's quite interesting from Billy. He says, you're not wrong. Can you believe that house prices are still going up? And that's with the economy shut down. So
Yeah.
if I mean, there's a big if in this one, mind you, but if we ever get out of lockdown and all of that, then the likelihood is that what you're talking about gets worse, Chris, because pricing will go up and up and up.
Yeah.
The demand continues to increase because that tap is not going to be turned off. I mean, I read today that I think 13 new arrivals by dinghy appeared on our southern coast. Well, I mean, those people are probably going to be staying here. That's 13 people. I wasn't sure if they were socially distanced in the dinghy, by the way, but leaving that to one aside. But yeah, I mean, as you said, so you've got a perfect storm here, haven't you? Really, you know, everything's going in kind of the wrong direction.
Absolutely, David, and the word "perfect storm" is a good description of it. You know, look at we talked about all this huge demand and this 313,000, you know, immigration. It was slightly less last year. It's not going to be less than 313 next year. It's going to be, you know, slightly more. But you know, Hong Kong, the government have envisaged that in the next 5 years that we'll be taking 300,000 Hong Kongers. Well, that is equivalent to one whole year's worth of immigration, extra over and above what we will normally take. And you know, you're just going to go from 30 people chasing a house and 29 people being disappointed to 49 people chasing a house or 50 people chasing a house and 49 being disappointed. And you know, I mean, there's the sofa surfing and the cardboard box and bench sleeping. You know, is going to go like that. And socially, it's just, you know, we're going to be, the benefit payments are going to be going like that. It's just not going to end well. And all that's happening is tinkering around the edges, bringing in electrical certificates, bringing in landlord licensing, taking 200,000 rooms out of the equation. No, that was a real brainstormer. That was, you know.
Yeah. And this all happened under the tutelage of a so-called conservative government as well.
The Labour's plans were a lot worse, would you believe?
I wouldn't be surprised about that, but yeah.
If they could be worse, David, they're bad enough. But if they could be worse, they would be under Labour.
Yeah, well, I don't doubt that. But I think that one of the fundamentals here then is that until the tap is turned off, then in terms of immigration, then unfortunately, because a consequence of that, the demand is always going to exceed supply, and that's always going to pressurize. And you combine that then with a growing population, although that demographic is a different matter, but nonetheless, a growing population. And we are heading for, we're going to go over the cliff at some point in the next 10 years, aren't we?
Well, absolutely. You know, it's this talk about rent control and rent capping because you know there's that concern about rents going up. What's going to happen if you know we're going to have an economics 101 year? But you know what's going to happen if the government were to turn around to bakers and say you can only charge 40 pence a loaf, right? Well, first of all, the bakers would say, what the hell do you think you're doing trying to tell me what I can and can't do in business with? Although that's what's happening with landlords, okay? But secondly, let's say that happened. Well, what would start to happen now? Let's see. Well, you know, the loaves would start getting smaller, like your marathon and your Mars bars, or your Snickers and your Mars bars. Show my age for marathons. But, you know, so they'll start getting smaller. So your loaf of bread will end up like that instead of like what it is now. And then the quality of the bread is going to be awful. But then slowly, less bakers are going to start baking that bread because they're not getting the monetary return for it. And so they're going to bake other stuff instead. And so, you know, you're going to find a shortage of bread. Well, it's what's happening with housing. You know, you try and regulate a business and, you know, you get a knock-on effect. You know, what they do on one thing affects something else, which affects something else. You know, you couldn't trust them to run a sweet shop.
No, well, of course, most of them have never run anything, and that's sort of evident. And it is sad to see, in particular, private landlords who as a vast majority, as you say, are just ordinary people, Chris, trying to do something for their future, so that that they have something to fall back on in when tough times come. And yet, I think they've been almost, along with the driver, by the way, government demonizes the driver, but they've demonized private landlords now to the point where I often think, unless you're gifted it as a consequence of a relative dying, why would you bother going into it? Why would you take all the hassle?
Yeah.
I remember, I just sort of a quick personal story. I actually did for a while have a property which I was a landlord of, and I can remember, and this was in the university area of Belfast, which some people on the stream may know. And I remember we were going off for a week's holiday somewhere back in the days when people could go on holidays, Chris. We were getting on a flight to somewhere sunny, and my wife's phone went. And it was one of the people that were renting out the property, and there was a problem with the dishwasher or something like that there. And I remember looking at my wife and thinking, "Hang on a second, this is just not fun." There's so much pressure on us, is what I'm trying to say. So we got out of it, we flogged it, and got rid of it, and bye bye. But yet I know that other landlords who are very diligent and do the right thing and do look after their tenants, but nonetheless, Chris, they have been demonized. It's increasingly financially less attractive because of the way government's approached it as well, isn't it? I mean, let's
they see it as a golden goose. They want their share. They want their 2 pennies worth, and they've been doing that with tax and by reducing tax allowances and by increasing tax takes and things, and by totally treating landlords differently to anything else in terms of allowing costs, business costs. I used to train landlords, and I used to explain the Section 24, the Finance Act, to them in this very peculiar way, David, because I like to explain things in a peculiar way. The way Section 24, the tax system, works on landlords is that it prevents private landlords from being able to claim interest on a business loan. In other words, a mortgage. So if you have a business loan to buy a tractor or whatever else, a van, if you're a carpenter or whatever, of course that's a business cost, isn't it?
Yeah,
so the cost of a mortgage to buy a house to rent out is a business cost in housing terms. But they treated landlords totally, and only landlords, totally distinct from any other kind of business expense, and said your expenses now, your mortgage costs, are not going to be allowed. Okay, so you're going to have to pay tax on all your mortgage. But that was only for residential property. So the example I used to give people when I was training landlords and tell them this story is, if you go and buy a house, a semi-detached house, and you were to operate a legal brothel from it, because you can operate legal brothels, okay? And the semi-detached next door, we both bought these properties now for £200,000. I got a mortgage for £200,000, and you got a mortgage for £200,000, okay? Now, you can claim the interest on your mortgage for it, because you're not using it for residential letting. So you can run your brothel and claim your tax back on your mortgage, but I'm letting it to a family who desperately need it because they're one of the 29, that I've given the property to. But I can't offset my taxes. So they're living next door to a brothel where you were able to claim your mortgage interest rate, and I can't. So I'm not going to be able to afford to run that property. So I'm going to sell it, or I'm going to use it for Airbnb, or I'm going to use it for holiday letting, or businesses can be quite creative when they're forced to be. They don't want to be, but when they're forced to be, they can be quite creative. And then when they run out of creative strategies, then they exit the market, like you say, and and then there's this allegation that, well, landlords are actually stopping first-time buyers from getting on the property land because they're buying up properties to rent, and they can afford to pay more for them because they're already established and they're not like on the bottom rung of the ladder. But like anything could be true. Like you say, well, look, there's Bentleys or Range Rovers on the road. Well, there are some, but they're not full of bloody Bentleys, are they? So, the thing is with these landlords, it's just not the case.
No.
That is the It's not the case on the whole. What the type of property that landlords want are properties that need a lot of work doing to them, that need a lot of renovation, and so so therefore they will be cheaper. But they're not the property that a first-time buyer will need, because you'll need to find £50,000 to renovate it.
Yeah.
And so a first-time buyer can't afford to pay the mortgage for that and not live in it for 6 months because it's being knocked about and being totally renovated, and they don't have the spare £50,000 to pay to renovate it. And so, or a landlord will buy somewhere that's going to be a shared house, to provide 5 or 6 rooms and to accommodate 5 or 6 different people, which is what's wanted. It's what's wanted. But all the effort and the focus against landlords is against landlords to a large measure who are providing houses of multiple occupation by licensing and by removing tax and things. And so, the government, by its actions, are not helping landlords to provide, vital accommodation, and that's desperately needed.
I think we can conclude that the private landlord, generally speaking, are people much more sinned against than sinning, and the government, as from everything we've chatted about during this, the government is actually making a bad situation worse. And unfortunately, Chris, if I understand a lot of what you've said, the times ahead are going to get tougher and tougher unless government actually faces up to the problems that you've specified and actually deals with them. So look, I think you've spoken up very eloquently, Chris, on something which, frankly, on this channel, we can talk about lots of things. We can talk about COVID. We can talk about all kinds of topics, let's say. But something as fundamental as housing does need to be aired. So I'm really pleased that you've taken this time, Chris, this evening to come onto the stream. I hope you'll come back onto the stream, by the way, because this issue isn't going to go away. And, there's been so many different aspects to this we haven't had time to actually really go into. But look, I want to thank you, Chris, first of all, for being with us tonight. It's great to see you. Thanks for being here. I want to thank the people on the stream for all your comments. If you're watching this in replay, don't forget to leave the comments down below, and so I can read them. And that's it from me for tonight. I'm not sure if I'll be back or not this week live, but there's the daily videos which you can watch on all the different channels, so you can see that from me then. So look, yes, just a few comments, some nice comments there. I see Chris coming up, and yes, as I say, I'm very keen on the stream. Sorry, to tackle just fundamental stuff. It's not. It shouldn't be complicated, but it is. Because government makes things complicated. One of the reasons I'm such a critic of big government. Thanks, and thanks for the kind words, Harry, City Troll. Thank you guys for being with us all, and thanks again, Chris. And that's it from me for tonight. Adieu. We shall speak soon. Goodbye, everybody.